Sarah Martinez walked down the dimly lit street, her footsteps echoing softly against the wet pavement. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the street still glistened under the orange glow of the streetlights. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders, not because of the cold, but out of habit. After years of military training, she had learned to make herself less noticeable, to blend into the background. At 28, Sarah looked like any other young woman walking home from work. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a plain black jacket. Nothing about her appearance suggested that she was one of the most highly trained combat specialists in the world. Nothing hinted at the fact that she had spent the last 6 years as a Navy SEAL, completing missions that most people could never imagine. Sarah had grown up in a small town in Texas, the daughter of a mechanic and a school teacher. From an early age, she had been different from other girls her age. While they played with dolls, she was outside climbing trees and building forts. Her father, Miguel, had taught her how to fix cars and use tools. Her mother, Elena, had instilled in her a love of learning and a strong sense of right and wrong. When Sarah graduated from high school, she shocked everyone by announcing that she wanted to join the Navy. Her parents were worried but proud. They knew their daughter was strong and determined, but the military was a tough world, especially for women. Sarah didn't care about the challenges. She had always been drawn to serving her country and protecting others. The Navy training was brutal, but Sarah thrived. She pushed herself harder than anyone else, running longer, lifting heavier weights, and studying more hours than her fellow recruits. Her instructors noticed her dedication and exceptional physical abilities. When the opportunity came to try out for the SEALs, Sarah didn't hesitate. The SEAL training was unlike anything she had ever experienced. For months, she endured physical and mental challenges that broke most candidates. She learned how to operate in extreme conditions, how to survive with minimal resources, and how to complete missions that seemed impossible. Out of her class of 200 candidates, only 12 made it through the entire program. Sarah was one of them and the only woman. For 6 years, Sarah served with distinction. She completed missions in hostile territories around the world, saved countless lives, and earned the respect of her fellow SEALs. Her teammates called her Ghost because of her ability to move silently and unseen. She could infiltrate enemy positions, gather intelligence, and extract targets without anyone knowing she had been there. But military life had taken its toll. Sarah had seen things that haunted her dreams and lost friends who felt like family. When her enlistment ended, she decided not to re-enlist. She wanted to try living a normal life, to see if she could find peace away from the battlefield. Sarah moved to Chicago, where she got a job as a security consultant for a private firm. The work was boring compared to her military service, but it paid well and allowed her to use some of her skills. She rented a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood and tried to establish a routine. Every morning she would go for a run, then head to work. In the evening she would come home, make dinner, and try to relax. Tonight was different, though. Sarah had worked late, helping a client design a security system for their office building. By the time she finished, it was nearly midnight. The streets were mostly empty as she walked the 6 blocks from the train station to her apartment. She didn't mind walking alone at night. After everything she had been through, a quiet Chicago street felt perfectly safe. As she turned onto her street, Sarah noticed a police car parked near the corner. She thought nothing of it at first. Police officers patrolled this area regularly, and crime was relatively low in this neighborhood. She continued walking, her mind focused on getting home and getting some sleep. Officer David Chen sat in his patrol car, filling out paperwork from his last call. It had been a long shift and he was tired and irritable. Chen had been a police officer for 8 years, but lately the job felt more stressful than rewarding. The department was understaffed, crime was increasing, and he felt like he was fighting a losing battle against the problems in the city. Chen looked up from his paperwork and saw Sarah walking down the street. Something about her triggered his suspicion. Maybe it was the late hour, or the way she moved with such confidence in an area where most people would be nervous. He had developed what he thought was a good instinct for spotting trouble, and something about this woman didn't seem right to him. Sarah noticed the police car but didn't change her pace or direction. She had nothing to hide and was doing nothing wrong. She was simply a citizen walking home on a public street. As she passed the patrol car, she glanced briefly at the officer inside but continued on her way. Chen made a decision that would change both their lives. He started his engine and slowly drove alongside Sarah. He rolled down his window and called out to her. "Excuse me, miss. Can I talk to you for a minute?" Sarah stopped and turned toward the patrol car. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I need to see some identification," Chen said, his tone already aggressive. "You look suspicious walking around here this late at night." Sarah felt a familiar frustration rise in her chest. She had dealt with this kind of profiling before, both as a civilian and during her military service. But she also knew that cooperating was usually the fastest way to resolve these situations. "Of course," she said calmly, reaching slowly into her jacket pocket for her wallet. Chen immediately became alarmed. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he shouted, jumping out of his car with his hand on his weapon. Sarah immediately raised her hands, her military training kicking in. She recognized the signs of an officer who was on edge and potentially dangerous. "I'm just reaching for my ID like you asked," she said in a steady voice. "Turn around and put your hands on the wall," Chen ordered, pointing to the brick wall of a nearby building. Sarah complied, knowing that arguing would only make the situation worse. She placed her hands against the cold brick wall and waited as Chen approached her from behind. She could hear his heavy breathing and sense his nervousness. This officer was clearly inexperienced in letting his emotions control his actions. Chen began to pat her down, supposedly searching for weapons. But his hands lingered inappropriately, and Sarah realized that this was no longer a standard police procedure. The officer was taking advantage of his position of power, and her situation was about to become much more serious than a simple case of mistaken suspicion. Sarah felt Officer Chen's hands move in ways that had nothing to do with searching for weapons. Her jaw tightened, but she remained still against the wall. Every instinct from her military training told her to stay calm and assess the situation before taking action. She had been in worse situations than this, facing enemies with automatic weapons and explosives. One aggressive police officer was not going to break her composure. "Officer, you're conducting an inappropriate search," Sarah said in a clear, controlled voice. "I'm going to need your badge number and the reason for this stop." Chen's face reddened with anger. "You don't get to make demands here, lady. I'm the one with the badge." His hands continued their inappropriate exploration, and Sarah realized that this man was not just incompetent, he was dangerous. In that moment, Sarah made a calculation. She could easily disarm and subdue Officer Chen. Her SEAL training had taught her dozens of ways to neutralize a threat quickly and efficiently. But she also knew that attacking a police officer, even in self-defense, would create legal problems that could follow her for the rest of her life. She decided to give him one more chance to back down. "Officer, I'm asking you to step back and conduct yourself professionally," she said, her voice carrying a hint of the authority she had wielded commanding special operations teams. Instead of backing down, Chen became more aggressive. "Shut your mouth and stay still," he snarled. Then he did something that crossed every line of professional conduct and human decency. He struck Sarah across the face with the back of his hand. The blow wasn't particularly hard by Sarah's standards. She had taken much worse hits during combat training and real missions. But the disrespect, the abuse of power, and the violation of her rights as a citizen ignited something inside her that she had kept carefully controlled since leaving the military. Sarah's head turned slightly from the impact, but she didn't stumble or cry out. Instead, she slowly turned back to face Chen, her dark eyes now holding a look that would have made hardened enemy combatants think twice about their next move. Chen, however, was too angry and too stupid to recognize the danger he had just awakened. He raised his hand to strike her again, believing that he had found an easy victim who would submit to his abuse. That was his mistake. As Chen's hand came down for the second blow, Sarah moved with the lightning speed and precision that had made her legendary among Navy SEALs. She caught his wrist in midair, her grip like a steel trap. Chen's eyes widened in shock as he realized that his hand was completely immobilized. "I wouldn't do that again if I were you," Sarah said quietly, her voice deadly calm. Chen tried to pull his hand free but couldn't move it even an inch. Panic began to creep into his voice. "Let go of me right now, or you're going to jail for assaulting an officer." Sarah held his wrist for a moment longer, applying just enough pressure to let him know that she could break it without effort if she chose to. Then she released him and stepped back, putting some distance between them. Chen stumbled backward, rubbing his wrist and staring at Sarah with a mixture of confusion and fear. Nothing about this situation was going the way he had expected. The woman he thought was an easy target had just demonstrated that she was far from helpless. "Who the hell are you?" Chen demanded, his voice shaking slightly. Sarah reached slowly into her jacket pocket, moving deliberately so that Chen could see her actions. She pulled out her wallet and removed her driver's license, but she also pulled out something else, her military ID card. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she said, extending both cards toward him, "and I'm a United States Navy SEAL." Chen looked at the military ID, his face going pale as he read the information. The card identified Sarah as a special warfare operator, first class, with 6 years of active service. Even someone as ignorant as Chen knew what the Navy SEALs were and what kind of training they received. "That's impossible," Chen stammered. "Women can't be SEALs." Sarah almost smiled at his ignorance. "The military opened all combat roles to women several years ago, officer. I was part of the first class to include female candidates who successfully completed SEAL training." Chen's mind was racing as he tried to process this information. He had just assaulted a decorated military veteran, someone who had risked her life serving the country that he had sworn to protect and serve. Worse, he had attempted to abuse someone who possessed skills that could have ended his career or his life in seconds. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here," Chen said, his tone suddenly much more respectful. "I was just doing my job, checking out suspicious activity in the neighborhood." Sarah's expression didn't change. "Your job involves conducting illegal searches and striking citizens in the face?" "I didn't mean to hit you that hard," Chen said weakly. "I thought you were reaching for a weapon or something." "I was complying with your orders to show identification," Sarah replied. "And then you decided to assault me because I asked you to conduct yourself professionally." Chen was beginning to realize just how much trouble he was in. If Sarah decided to file a complaint, his career would be over. The department wouldn't tolerate an officer who had assaulted a Navy SEAL veteran, especially not in the current climate where police misconduct was under intense scrutiny. "Please," Chen said, his voice taking on a pleading tone. "I've got a family, kids. I made a mistake, but I can't lose my job over this." Sarah studied the officer for a long moment. She could see the fear in his eyes, the desperation of a man who suddenly understood the consequences of his actions. Part of her wanted to make him pay for what he had done. She had dedicated her life to serving and protecting others, and here was someone who was supposed to share that mission, but had instead chosen to abuse his power. But Sarah had also learned something during her years of military service. Sometimes showing mercy was more powerful than seeking revenge. Sometimes giving someone a second chance could create a better outcome for everyone involved. "Officer Chen," she said, reading his name tag. "I'm going to give you an opportunity to learn from this mistake. But if I ever hear of you treating another citizen the way you treated me tonight, I will personally ensure that you face the full consequences of your actions." Chen nodded eagerly, relief flooding his face. "Yes, ma'am, I understand. This will never happen again." Sarah put her IDs back in her wallet and started to walk away. But then she stopped and turned back to face Chen one more time. "And officer? The next woman you decide to assault might not be as forgiving as I am. You'd better think very carefully about the kind of police officer you want to be." With that, Sarah continued walking toward her apartment, leaving Chen standing alone on the empty street, staring after her and contemplating how close he had come to destroying his own life. The next morning, Officer David Chen sat in his patrol car staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He hadn't slept at all after his encounter with Sarah Martinez. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face when she caught his wrist, the calm certainty in her voice when she told him she was a Navy SEAL, and the controlled fury in her eyes when she gave him that final warning. Chen had been a police officer for 8 years, and he thought he had seen everything. He had dealt with gang members, drug dealers, and violent criminals, but he had never encountered someone like Sarah. There had been something in her presence, a quiet confidence that spoke of experiences far beyond anything he could imagine. He pulled out his phone and did something he should have done before approaching Sarah the night before. He researched what it actually meant to be a Navy SEAL. What he found made his blood run Cold Navy SEALs underwent some of the most intense military training in the world. They learned advanced combat techniques, underwater demolition, parachuting, survival skills, and dozens of other specialized abilities. They operated in the most dangerous places on Earth, completing missions that regular military units couldn't handle. The failure rate for SEAL training was over 90%, meaning that only the most exceptional candidates ever made it through the program, and he had hit one of them across the face. Chen thought about his 2 young daughters at home, about his wife who worked as a nurse at the local hospital. If Sarah had decided to file a complaint, if she had chosen to press charges for assault, his career would be over. His family would lose their health insurance, their home, their stability. Everything he had worked for would be gone, but she hadn't done that. Instead, she had given him a warning and a chance to be better. Chen didn't understand why, but he was grateful beyond words. Meanwhile, Sarah was at her office trying to focus on her work, but finding her thoughts drifting back to the previous night's encounter. She had dealt with discrimination and harassment throughout her military career. From fellow soldiers who didn't think women belonged in combat roles to civilians who couldn't believe she was capable of the same things as her male counterparts. Usually, she let these incidents roll off her back. She had learned early in her career that responding to every slight or insult would consume all her energy and accomplish nothing. But something about Officer Chen's behavior had bothered her more than usual. Maybe it was because he was supposed to be protecting people, not victimizing them. Or maybe it was because she had seen too many good soldiers die serving their country, while people like Chen abused the authority they had been given. Whatever the reason, Sarah found herself thinking about other women who might not be as lucky as she had been the night before. During her lunch break, Sarah made a decision. She called the Chicago Police Department and asked to speak with Officer Chen's supervisor. "This is Sergeant Williams," came the voice on the other end of the line. "Sergeant Williams, my name is Sarah Martinez. I had an encounter with one of your officers last night, Officer David Chen, and I wanted to discuss it with you." Williams immediately became alert. Citizen complaints were always serious business, but something in Sarah's tone suggested this was more than a routine issue. "I'm listening, Ms. Martinez. What happened?" Sarah gave Williams a clear, factual account of the previous night's events. She didn't exaggerate or add emotional commentary. She simply described what Chen had done, how she had responded, and how the encounter had ended. Williams listened in growing dismay. He had known Chen for several years, and had noticed that the younger officer sometimes let his emotions get the better of him. But what Sarah was describing went far beyond poor judgment. It was criminal behavior. "Ms. Martinez, I want to assure you that this kind of conduct is completely unacceptable and not representative of our department," Williams said. "I need to ask, are you planning to file formal charges against Officer Chen?" Sarah had expected this question. "That depends, Sergeant. I'm more interested in making sure this doesn't happen to someone else than I am in punishing Officer Chen. What I want to know is what your department is going to do to address the underlying problems that led to this incident." Williams was impressed by Sarah's approach. Most people in her situation would be demanding Chen's badge and threatening lawsuits. Instead, she seemed more concerned with preventing future incidents. "What kind of background do you have, Ms. Martinez, if you don't mind me asking?" "I'm a Navy SEAL veteran with 6 years of active service." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Williams had served in the Army before becoming a police officer, and he understood exactly what Sarah's military background meant. "Jesus," Williams said quietly. "Chen has no idea how lucky he is that you didn't decide to defend yourself." "The thought crossed my mind," Sarah admitted. "But I prefer to solve problems rather than create new ones." Williams found himself genuinely impressed by this woman. She had every right to be furious, every justification for demanding Chen's head on a platter. Instead, she was trying to find a constructive solution. "What would you like to see happen, Ms. Martinez?" Sarah had given this considerable thought. "I think Officer Chen needs additional training on appropriate conduct during citizen contacts. I also think he needs to understand the gravity of what he did and why it was wrong. If he's willing to learn from this experience, then maybe some good can come out of it. And if he's not willing to learn, then you'll have a much bigger problem on your hands, and I'll be happy to discuss other options." Williams understood the implicit threat. If Chen didn't change his behavior, Sarah would be watching, and she wouldn't be as forgiving the next time. "I'll tell you what, Ms. Martinez, I'm going to require Officer Chen to attend additional training on professional conduct and civil rights. I'm also going to assign him to work with one of our most experienced sergeants for the next 6 months. And I'm going to make it very clear to him that any future complaints about his conduct will result in immediate termination. Sarah considered this proposal. It wasn't perfect, but it was a reasonable start. I'd also like to suggest that Officer Chen spend some time learning about the people he's supposed to be serving and protecting. Maybe some community outreach, volunteer work with veterans organizations, something that reminds him why he became a police officer in the first place. Williams was struck by the wisdom of this suggestion. Too many officers lost sight of their mission to serve and protect, instead becoming focused on authority and control. Maybe forcing Chen to reconnect with the community would help him remember what his job was really supposed to be about. That's an excellent idea. I'll make that part of his remedial training as well. Sarah felt satisfied with the conversation. She had used her encounter with Chen as an opportunity to potentially improve the department's practices and prevent future incidents. It was the kind of strategic thinking that had made her successful as a SEAL, always looking for ways to turn tactical setbacks into strategic advantages. Thank you, Sergeant Williams. I appreciate your professionalism in handling this matter. No, Ms. Martinez, thank you for your service to our country and for giving us a chance to address this problem internally. Not everyone would have been as generous as you've been. After Sarah hung up the phone, she felt better about the situation. She had turned a negative experience into an opportunity for positive change. And maybe, just maybe, she had helped Officer Chen become the kind of police officer his community deserved. 2 weeks later, Officer David Chen found himself standing outside the Chicago Veterans Center, holding a piece of paper with his assignment details. Sergeant Williams had been true to his word. Chen was now required to complete 40 hours of community service at the Veterans Center as part of his remedial training program. Chen had initially been angry about the assignment. He felt like he was being treated unfairly, punished too harshly for what he saw as a minor incident. But as the days passed and he had time to think about what had really happened that night, his perspective began to change. The more he learned about Navy SEALs and what Sarah Martinez had accomplished during her military service, the more he realized how badly he had misjudged the situation. This wasn't just a case of poor police work. He had assaulted a decorated war veteran who had risked her life serving their country. Inside the Veterans Center, Chen was greeted by Maria Rodriguez, the volunteer coordinator. Maria was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "You must be Officer Chen," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Maria. Sergeant Williams told me you'd be helping us out for a few weeks." Chen shook her hand, feeling awkward about the circumstances that had brought him here. "Yes, ma'am. I'm supposed to do 40 hours of community service." Maria studied his face for a moment. She had been working with veterans for over 10 years, and she had a good sense for reading people. She could see that Chen was uncomfortable, but she also sensed that he wasn't entirely resistant to being here. "Well, we can certainly use the help," Maria said. "Let me show you around and explain what we do here." The Chicago Veterans Center provided a wide range of services to former military personnel. They offered job placement assistance, counseling services, help with VA benefits, and social programs to combat isolation and depression. The center served veterans from all branches of the military and all eras, from Vietnam veterans in their 70s to young men and women who had recently returned from deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. As Maria led Chen through the facility, he began to see a side of military service that he had never considered before. In one room, a group of older veterans were participating in a support group for those dealing with PTSD. In another, a young woman was getting help filling out job applications, her prosthetic leg visible beneath her jeans. "Many of our clients are dealing with challenges that most people never have to face," Maria explained. "Physical injuries, psychological trauma, difficulty transitioning to civilian life. Some of them feel forgotten by the society they serve to protect." Chen thought about Sarah Martinez and wondered if she had faced similar challenges when she left the military. Had she struggled to find her place in civilian society? Had she felt isolated or misunderstood? Maria assigned Chen to work with Robert Tank Thompson, a Vietnam veteran who coordinated the center's outreach programs. Tank was a large man with weathered hands and tired eyes, but when he smiled, his whole face lit up. So you're the cop who's here to learn about veterans, Tank said, looking Chen up and down. What do you know about military service? Not much, Chen admitted. I've never served, Tank nodded. That's honest, at least. Most people think they understand what we've been through, but they don't have a clue. Over the next few days, Chen worked alongside Tank, visiting homeless encampments where veterans lived in tents and makeshift shelters. They distributed food, clothing, and information about services available at the center. Chen was shocked by what he saw. Many of these homeless veterans were dealing with untreated mental health issues stemming from their military service. Others had been injured in combat and struggled with chronic pain or disability. Some had simply fallen through the cracks of a system that was supposed to take care of them after they came home. This guy here, Tank said, pointing to a man sitting alone by a small fire, served 3 tours in Afghanistan, Purple Heart recipient, lost his leg to an IED and came home to find out his wife had left him and cleaned out their bank account. Been on the streets for 2 years. Chen felt a knot forming in his stomach. How had he become so disconnected from the reality of what military service meant? How had he developed such a narrow, ignorant view of the people who had sacrificed so much for their country? On his 4th day at the center, Chen was helping organize donated clothing when he heard a familiar voice behind him. Well, this is unexpected. Chen turned around to see Sarah Martinez standing in the doorway, holding a large box of what appeared to be winter jackets. Ms. Martinez, Chen said, his face flushing with embarrassment. I didn't know you volunteered here. Sarah set down the box and looked at Chen with curiosity rather than anger. I've been coming here once a month for the past year, she said. I like to stay connected with the veteran community. Chen didn't know what to say. The last time he had seen Sarah, she had been giving him a warning about his conduct as a police officer. Now here she was volunteering her time to help other veterans. Are you here because of what happened between us? Sarah asked directly. Chen nodded, feeling ashamed. It's part of my remedial training. Sergeant Williams thought it would be good for me to learn about the people I'm supposed to be serving and protecting. Sarah considered this for a moment. And what have you learned so far? Chen looked around the room, thinking about the stories he had heard over the past few days. I've learned that I've been a terrible police officer, he said quietly. I've learned that I've been treating people like potential criminals instead of citizens who deserve respect and protection. Sarah was surprised by the sincerity in his voice. She had expected him to be resentful about his assignment, to see it as unfair punishment. Instead, he seemed genuinely affected by what he was experiencing. That's a hard thing to admit, Sarah said. It's true, though, Chen replied. I became a cop because I wanted to help people, but somewhere along the way I lost sight of that. I started seeing threats everywhere instead of people who needed help. Tank approached them, having overheard part of their conversation. You two know each other? We had a professional encounter a couple of weeks ago, Sarah said diplomatically. Tank looked between them and seemed to understand immediately. Ah, he said. Officer Chen, you picked the wrong veteran to mess with. Chen's face reddened again, but Sarah held up a hand to stop Tank from saying more. Actually, Tank, Officer Chen is here trying to learn from his mistakes. I think that takes courage. Tank studied Chen for a moment, then nodded approvingly. Fair enough. Everyone deserves a chance to do better. For the rest of the day, Chen worked alongside Sarah, organizing donations and helping veterans navigate the various services available to them. He watched as she interacted with other veterans, seeing the respect and admiration they had for her. One older veteran, a Marine who had served in Vietnam, pulled Chen aside later in the day. You know who that young lady is? The Marine asked, nodding toward Sarah. She's a Navy SEAL, Chen said. The Marine shook his head. She's more than that, son. She's the real deal. I've heard stories about some of the missions she completed. That woman has more courage in her little finger than most people have in their whole body. Chen watched Sarah helping a young veteran fill out paperwork for disability benefits, patiently explaining each section and making sure he understood his rights. This was the same woman he had struck across the face 2 weeks ago. The same woman he had dismissed as a potential criminal. The realization of how wrong he had been, how badly he had misjudged her character, hit him like a physical blow. Sarah Martinez wasn't just a decorated veteran. She was the kind of person he should have aspired to be. 3 weeks into his community service at the Veterans Center, Officer David Chen was a different man than the one who had assaulted Sarah Martinez on that dark street. Every day brought new stories, new perspectives, and new realizations about the people he had sworn to serve and protect. On this particular Thursday morning, Chen was helping Tank organize a job fair for veterans when an emergency call came into the center. A veteran named Marcus Williams had barricaded himself in his apartment after receiving an eviction notice, and his neighbors were worried he might hurt himself. "The police are on their way," Maria told Tank and Chen. "But Marcus has had bad experiences with law enforcement before. He might respond better to someone from the veteran community." Chen felt his stomach drop. This was exactly the kind of situation where his old approach to policing would have made everything worse. Before his training at the Veterans Center, he would have shown up with backup, treated Marcus as a dangerous suspect, and escalated the situation until someone got hurt. "I should go," Chen said. "Maybe I can help prevent this from becoming a disaster." Tank looked at him skeptically. "No offense, Officer Chen, but Marcus isn't going to trust a cop right now." Sarah, who had been listening to the conversation from across the room, approached them. "What if Officer Chen came with me?" she suggested. "Marcus knows me, and having a police officer there who actually understands veteran issues might help." Chen was surprised that Sarah would volunteer to work with him, especially in such a delicate situation. "Are you sure? I don't want to make things worse." "You won't," Sarah said with confidence, "but only if you follow my lead and remember everything you've learned here." They arrived at Marcus's apartment building to find 2 police cars already on the scene. The officers had cordoned off the area and were preparing to force entry into the apartment. Chen recognized one of them, Officer Rodriguez, a colleague from his precinct. "Chen, what are you doing here?" Rodriguez asked. "This isn't your sector. I'm here with the Veterans Center," Chen explained. "We know the subject. He's a combat veteran who might be having a crisis." Rodriguez looked confused. "Since when do you work with the Veterans Center?" "It's a long story," Chen said. "But right now we need to focus on Marcus. Can you give us a chance to talk to him before you go in?" Rodriguez was about to refuse when Sarah stepped forward. "Officer, I'm Sarah Martinez, a Navy SEAL veteran and volunteer with the Veterans Center." Marcus Williams served 2 tours in Iraq and was awarded a Bronze Star for valor. He's not a criminal, he's a hero who's having a difficult time. Something in Sarah's tone and bearing made Rodriguez reconsider. 5 minutes, he said. "But if he doesn't come out voluntarily, we're going in." Sarah and Chen approached Marcus's door while the other officers maintained their positions. Sarah knocked gently. "Marcus, it's Sarah from the Veterans Center. I've got someone with me who wants to help." There was a long silence, then Marcus's voice came through the door. "I'm not coming out, Sarah. They're going to arrest me and I can't go to jail. I can't be locked up." Chen could hear the desperation and fear in Marcus's voice. It reminded him of some of the stories he had heard at the Veterans Center. Combat veterans who couldn't handle being confined or restrained because it triggered memories of captivity or traumatic experiences. "Marcus, this is Officer Chen with the Chicago Police. I'm not here to arrest you. I just want to talk." "I don't trust cops," Marcus shouted back. "They don't understand what we've been through." Chen thought about all the veterans he had met over the past 3 weeks, all the stories he had heard about their struggles with PTSD, homelessness, and discrimination. He thought about his own ignorance and prejudice and how it had nearly destroyed his encounter with Sarah. "You're right, Marcus," Chen called through the door. "I didn't understand. I've spent my whole career as a police officer thinking I knew what service meant, but I was wrong. I've been learning from veterans like Sarah here, and I'm starting to understand how badly I've failed the people I was supposed to protect." There was another silence. Then Marcus asked, "What do you mean?" Chen looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "A few weeks ago, I assaulted a Navy SEAL veteran during a traffic stop," Chen said, his voice heavy with shame. "I let my ignorance and prejudice control my actions, and I hurt someone who had sacrificed everything to serve our country." "You hit a SEAL?" Marcus sounded shocked. "He hit me," Sarah said calmly. "But he's been working to understand what he did wrong and how to do better." Chen continued, "Marcus, I can't undo what I did to Sarah, and I can't undo all the times I've treated veterans like criminals instead of heroes. But I can promise you that if you open this door, I will treat you with the respect and dignity that you deserve." Slowly, they heard the sound of locks being turned. The door opened to reveal Marcus Williams, a thin man in his 30s with haunted eyes and trembling hands. He looked at Chen with suspicion, but he stepped aside to let them enter. Marcus's apartment was sparse and neat, with military precision evident in the way everything was organized. On the wall were his military awards, including the Bronze Star that Sarah had mentioned. On the table was an eviction notice and several unpaid bills. "I lost my job last month," Marcus explained. "My PTSD has been getting worse and I've been having panic attacks at work. They said I was unreliable." Sarah sat down across from Marcus while Chen remained standing near the door, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "Marcus, we can help you," Sarah said. "There are programs for veterans facing eviction, and there are employers who understand PTSD and are willing to work with veterans." "I've tried everything," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "I served my country for 6 years. I did everything they asked me to do. And now I'm going to be homeless." Chen felt anger rising in his chest, but not at Marcus, at the system that had failed this decorated veteran, at the employers who discriminated against people with PTSD, at his own profession for treating veterans like criminals instead of heroes. "Marcus," Chen said, stepping forward carefully, "I want you to know that you're not alone in this. There are people who care about what happens to you, people who want to help." Marcus looked at him skeptically. "Why should I trust you? You just admitted that you assaulted a veteran." "Because that's exactly why you should trust me," Chen replied. "I know what it's like to be wrong, to make terrible mistakes. And I know what it's like to want a chance to do better." Over the next hour, Sarah and Chen worked together to develop a plan for Marcus. Sarah knew about emergency financial assistance programs for veterans, and Chen offered to connect Marcus with employers who had positive relationships with the police department and were committed to hiring veterans. When they finally left Marcus's apartment, he was calm and hopeful instead of desperate and suicidal. The other officers were amazed at how peacefully the situation had been resolved. "How did you do that?" Rodriguez asked Chen. "Usually these calls end with someone in handcuffs or worse." Chen looked at Sarah, then back at his colleague. "I learned to listen instead of assume," he said. "I learned to see people as human beings instead of potential threats." Rodriguez looked confused, but Chen didn't have time to explain. He was too busy thinking about how different his career might have been if he had understood these lessons from the beginning. 6 months after the incident on that dark Chicago street, Officer David Chen stood before a room full of new police recruits at the Chicago Police Academy. Sergeant Williams had asked him to speak to the incoming class about community policing and working with veterans, a role Chen never could have imagined himself in just half a year earlier. "How many of you think you know what a dangerous person looks like?" Chen asked the room full of eager young faces. Most of the hands went up. These recruits were confident, ready to take on the world and fight crime. Chen remembered feeling the same way when he had graduated from the academy 8 years ago. "I thought I knew too," Chen continued. "I thought dangerous people looked suspicious, acted nervous, didn't belong in nice neighborhoods. I was wrong about almost everything." Chen told them about Sarah Martinez, though he didn't use her real name. He described how his assumptions and prejudices had led him to assault a decorated war hero, how his ignorance had nearly destroyed his career and hurt someone who deserved nothing but respect. "The most dangerous thing you can bring to this job is the belief that you already know everything you need to know," Chen said. "Every person you encounter has a story, has experiences that shaped them, has reasons for their actions that you might never understand unless you take the time to listen." One of the recruits raised her hand. "But Officer Chen, how do we balance officer safety with treating everyone with respect? What if someone really is dangerous?" It was a fair question, and Chen had wrestled with it himself during his months of remedial training. "Officer safety is important," he said, "but real officer safety comes from de-escalation, communication, and understanding. The safest thing you can do is treat every person with dignity and respect, because that's how you build trust and cooperation." After his presentation, Chen drove to the Veterans Center, where he now volunteered regularly on his days off. His 40 hours of mandatory community service had ended months ago, but he kept coming back. The work gave him a sense of purpose that routine police patrol had never provided. Sarah was already there when he arrived, working with a group of female veterans who were dealing with employment discrimination. Chen had learned that this was one of her particular areas of focus, helping women veterans who faced double discrimination based on both their veteran status and their gender. "How did the presentation go?" Sarah asked when she saw him. "Better than I expected. Chen replied. I think some of them actually listened, Sarah smiled. You've become quite the advocate for community policing. Chen thought about how much his life had changed since that night when he had made the worst mistake of his career. I had a good teacher, he said. Their relationship had evolved from victim and perpetrator to colleagues and eventually to something approaching friendship. Chen knew he could never fully undo what he had done to Sarah, but she had given him the opportunity to learn from his mistakes and become a better officer. Actually, Sarah said, I wanted to talk to you about something. I've been offered a position with the police department's community outreach program. They want me to help develop training programs for officers working with veterans and military families. Chen was surprised. You'd be willing to work with law enforcement after what happened? Sarah shrugged. What happened between us showed me that there are officers who are willing to learn and change. If I can help prevent other incidents like ours, then maybe some good can come from it. Chen felt a mixture of pride and guilt. Pride that Sarah thought enough of his transformation to consider working with police officers, and guilt that his actions had been the catalyst for her involvement. I think you'd be amazing at that job, Chen said sincerely. Over the following weeks, Chen watched as Sarah began working with the police department to develop new training protocols. She brought the same precision and dedication to this work that she had brought to her military service. One evening, as they were leaving the Veterans Center together, Sarah turned to Chen with a serious expression. I need to ask you something, she said. Do you ever regret what happened between us? Chen was surprised by the question. Of course I regret it. I regret hitting you. I regret treating you badly. I regret all of it. Sarah shook her head. That's not what I mean. Do you regret that it led to all of this? Your training at the Veterans Center, your work with community policing, your new perspective on law enforcement. Chen considered the question carefully. It was true that his assault on Sarah had ultimately led to positive changes in his life and career. But that didn't justify what he had done. I regret that it took me hurting someone to learn these lessons, Chen said. I wish I had been smart enough to figure it out without causing harm. Sarah nodded approvingly. That's the right answer. The fact that good came from it doesn't excuse what you did, but it does mean that you've taken responsibility for your actions and used them to become better. A year later, Chen was promoted to sergeant and put in charge of the department's new Veteran Affairs unit. His team specialized in calls involving veterans and worked closely with mental health professionals and community organizations to address problems. Before they escalated, the unit had dramatically reduced the number of violent confrontations between police and veterans and had helped connect hundreds of veterans with needed services and support. Chen often worked with Sarah, who had become the department's primary consultant on veteran issues. Together, they had developed training programs that were being adopted by police departments across the country. One day, Chen received a call from Marcus Williams, the veteran he and Sarah had helped during that crisis intervention. Marcus had found stable employment and housing, and was calling to thank Chen for his help. Officer Chen, Marcus said, I don't know if you remember me, but you probably saved my life that day when you came to my apartment. Chen remembered very well. How are you doing, Marcus? I'm doing great. I wanted you to know that I'm working as a counselor now, helping other veterans who are going through what I went through. That day when you listened to me instead of just trying to arrest me, it changed everything. After hanging up the phone, Chen sat in his office thinking about the chain of events that had led him to this point. His worst moment as a police officer had somehow led to his best moments. His greatest failure had taught him how to succeed. He thought about Sarah, who had shown him more grace and forgiveness than he deserved. She had turned his act of violence into an opportunity for education and growth. Not just for him, but for the entire police department. Chen realized that this was what real strength looked like, not the ability to hurt someone, but the ability to help them become better than they were before. 2 years after their first encounter, Sarah Martinez and David Chen stood together on a stage in front of 500 law enforcement officers from across the Midwest. They were the keynote speakers at the Regional Conference on Community Policing and Veteran Affairs, sharing their story and the lessons they had learned together. Chen looked out at the audience of police officers, many of whom reminded him of his younger self, confident, eager to make a difference, but potentially blind to their own prejudices and assumptions. 2 years ago, I was the worst kind of police officer, Chen began. I thought I knew everything I needed to know about people, about threats, about how to do my job. I was wrong about all of it. Sarah stepped forward to continue the presentation. Officer Chen assaulted me during what should have been a routine encounter, she said matter-of-factly. He struck me across the face because I asked him to conduct himself professionally. A murmur went through the audience. This wasn't the kind of story law enforcement conferences usually featured. A police officer admitting to criminal behavior against an innocent citizen. I could have ended Officer Chen's career that night, Sarah continued. I could have filed charges, demanded his termination, made sure he paid the full price for what he did. Instead, I chose to see if he could learn from his mistake. Chen took over again. The question you're all asking yourselves is why? Why did this decorated Navy SEAL veteran give me a second chance when I had assaulted her? The answer changed my entire understanding of what it means to serve and protect. Over the next hour, they told their complete story. They talked about Chen's community service at the Veterans Center, about the homeless veterans living under bridges, about Marcus Williams and his suicidal crisis, about all the lessons Chen had learned about the people he was supposed to be serving. The most important thing I learned, Chen said, is that being a police officer isn't about having power over people. It's about using whatever power you have to help people solve their problems and improve their lives. Sarah spoke about her transition from military service to civilian life, about the challenges veterans faced when trying to reintegrate into society, and about the importance of having law enforcement officers who understood those challenges. Veterans don't need to be treated as potential threats, Sarah explained. They need to be treated as citizens who have earned the right to respect and dignity through their service to our country. After their presentation, they were approached by dozens of officers who wanted to learn more about implementing veteran-focused community policing programs in their own departments. Chen was amazed by the enthusiasm and willingness to learn that these officers displayed. One young officer from Detroit raised her hand during the question and answer session. Ms. Martinez, how did you know that Officer Chen could change? How did you know he was worth investing in? Sarah considered the question carefully. I didn't know, she admitted, but I believe that people are capable of growth and redemption if they're given the opportunity and the proper motivation. Officer Chen proved that belief was justified. Chen added, the key was that I had to want to change. Sarah gave me the opportunity, but I had to do the work. Nobody can force someone to become a better person. They have to choose it for themselves. After the conference, Chen and Sarah drove back to Chicago together, reflecting on how far they had come since that night on the dark street. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had made different choices that night? Sarah asked. Chen had thought about this many times. If you had pressed charges, I would have lost my job and probably gone to prison. My family would have been destroyed, and I never would have learned any of the lessons that made me a better officer and a better person, and I would have missed the opportunity to help change an entire police department's approach to veteran affairs, Sarah added. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show mercy instead of seeking justice. Chen nodded. You taught me that being strong doesn't mean being able to hurt people. Being strong means being able to help them become better than they were before. Their work together had expanded beyond Chicago. They were now consulting with police departments across the country, helping to develop training programs and policies that improved relationships between law enforcement and the veteran community. The Chicago Police Department's Veteran Affairs Unit, which Chen commanded, had become a model for other departments. Officer-involved incidents with veterans had decreased by over 70%, and veteran satisfaction with police services had increased dramatically. Marcus Williams had become one of their success stories, working as a peer counselor and helping other veterans navigate crises with law enforcement. He often spoke at their training sessions, sharing his perspective on what it was like to be a veteran in crisis and how officers could help, rather than escalate these situations. The thing that saved my life, Marcus would tell the officers, wasn't that Officer Chen was particularly skilled or experienced. It was that he listened to me as a human being instead of treating me as a threat to be neutralized. 6 months later, Chen received unexpected news. He had been selected to receive the department's Community Service Award for his work with veterans and his innovative approach to community policing. At the awards ceremony, Chen was surprised to see Sarah in the audience, along with many of the veterans he had worked with over the past 2 years. When his name was called, they gave him a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. In his acceptance speech, Chen looked directly at Sarah. "This award doesn't belong to me," he said. "It belongs to a Navy SEAL veteran who showed me what real courage looks like. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to do the right thing even when you have every reason to choose revenge instead." Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she listened to Chen speak. She thought about that night 2 years ago, when she had made the split-second decision to give him a chance for redemption instead of destroying his life. It had been one of the best decisions she had ever made. After the ceremony, Chen approached Sarah with a serious expression. "I need to ask you something," he said. "I've been offered a position with the Department of Justice, helping to develop national standards for police interactions with veterans. It would mean leaving Chicago, leaving our work here." Sarah smiled. "That's wonderful, David. You should take it." Chen was surprised. "But what about our partnership here? What about all the work we're doing?" "The work will continue," Sarah said confidently. "You've trained dozens of officers who can carry on what we started, and at the national level you can help thousands of officers learn the lessons you've learned." Chen realized she was right. Their work in Chicago had always been about more than just one city or one police department. It was about changing the culture of law enforcement and helping officers understand their true mission of service and protection. As they stood together outside the awards ceremony, Chen reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. He had started as Sarah's attacker and become her partner in creating positive change. "Thank you," he said simply. Sarah shook her head. "Thank yourself. You did the hard work of changing who you were. I just gave you the opportunity," Chen smiled. "No, that's not what I mean. Thank you for showing me what it really means to serve and protect. Thank you for teaching me that the most powerful thing a person can do is help someone else become better than they were before." Sarah extended her hand to Chen, and he shook it firmly, but then she surprised him by pulling him into a brief hug. "Go change the world, Officer Chen," she said. Or should I say Deputy Director Chen. As Chen walked away toward his new life and new responsibilities, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had taken the worst moment of both their lives and turned it into something that would benefit countless people for years to come. It was exactly the kind of strategic thinking that had made her successful as a Navy SEAL, always looking for ways to turn setbacks into victories, always finding ways to accomplish the mission no matter how difficult the circumstances. The mission, in this case, had been to make the world a little bit better, one changed heart at a time.